I started Google searching businesses to buy, and then you got your classic biz buy sell and LoopNet. And then over time, I finally figured out that brokerages were the way to go. Once I found businesses that I liked, Tryform was one of the businesses I was seriously considering. How the heck am I gonna pay for this? Luckily, the broker that the owners were using was helpful in connecting me with banks. I also then started doing my own diligence and reached out to banks. So I learned how to play the field a little bit and that I would need to use an SBA loan. The rates were really high at the time. It was really about establishing a relationship with them, making sure they felt secure about not just me, but about the business.
Welcome back to Succession Stories. Today's guest traded his corporate comfort for coolant and chaos, moving away from the corporate spreadsheets to the shop floor. He's going to share with us what it's like to buy into an existing business, work with a seasoned team, and chase growth opportunities with a hands-on approach in an industry where there really isn't always a playbook. So welcome to the show, Aashay Kumar, the owner of Tryform Incorporated.
Thanks for having me, Laurie.
Yeah, I'm excited for our conversation. Right out of the gates, Aashay, I kind of planted a little bit of the seeds here that you've been through a transition. You've purchased a business. I want to learn all about that. But let me just start with kind of the top level question. Why buy a business versus starting one from scratch?
Yeah, great question. I think it's individual, but for me, it felt more comfortable to start in the entrepreneur space, looking for established businesses that had positive cash flow. So that's really where I honed in my interest. I think the counter to that is, why didn't you start a business? And the main reason is I didn't have a pressing problem that I had a solution for. But I think if you do, then it's totally fair to say starting makes way more sense than buying in.
How long did you think about buying a business before it actually all came together? Was this something you said um, from the get-go in college that you had always intended to be an entrepreneur?
I think from the early college days, I had certainly intended to be an entrepreneur. I didn't think about entrepreneurship through acquisition until much later. So it was probably in my last year at my prior company, McMaster-Carr, when I heard about the idea and I started actually looking seriously for businesses to buy.
And did you go about it in kind of like an all-in fashion, or was this something on the side in stealth mode where you didn't really talk about it with your colleagues or you didn't talk about it with family or friends?
It definitely was in stealth mode from a corporate perspective because it was due to personal reasons. My wife and I lived in Chicago. She matched in fellowship and in New York, and it was basically either I apply for jobs or look to do my own thing. And as I was going through the job application process, I just couldn't get excited about working at another company. So that's when I started looking for jobs. But all of that was in stealth from a professional standpoint because I couldn't tell my company that that's the path I was taking yet.
And your wife was supportive though. She was like, "Hey, you've got a steady paycheck here. I'm in my fellowship, medical school and everything." How did you together make the decision that this was the leap that you were going to take?
Yeah, I think it went relatively quickly. So as I started to look for businesses, Triform popped up probably in month 4 of that search in earnest. And within 2 months of that, we were at the point of signing an LOI. So from my wife's perspective, I'm sure it was very quick. But to your point, we held hands, we talked about it, and then we took the jump together. So we knew the risks involved. We knew the life that we would have because Triform's in Pittsburgh. She's in New York. So I do travel back and forth on weekends to spend time with her. But we kind of went all in together, and it's been fun and chaotic, like you said.
Fun and chaotic. Well, I want to dig in a little bit more about the process because I think for folks listening who, we have an audience of folks who have already bought businesses, and we have folks that are considering it. We have folks that are going to sell one day. We have, that's the beauty of succession stories is we really try to look forward and we also look backward. And in this situation for you, you are in the midst of it. How long have you owned the business at this point?
It's been 15 months.
Okay, so we'll say over a year.
Yep.
And how old are you, may I ask?
I am 33.
Okay. So you're in your 30s and you took this leap, and I think that that's really important, right? Because I think there's an element of risk taking because, as we'll talk about in a moment, you took on some debt to purchase the business, and so therein lies inherently some risk for the purchase of with any purchase, not just this purchase. So that's part of it, and then the other part of it too, just to distinguish from acquisition entrepreneurs who are part of a search fund. We can talk, what is a search fund in your opinion, definition, how would you define it? And why did you pursue your own independent search versus being part of a search fund?
Yep. Do you want me to start with that last question? Awesome. So when I heard about search funds around the same time that I was starting to look for businesses. So I was very much comparing the two. And I believe I interviewed with two different companies, maybe it was three, that were looking for a CEO or COO to come on board and lead that company. I think search funds are a pro in that you're backed by an amazing set of resources from the get-go. You don't have to take on debt. So, and you get a salary. So you get to keep some of that corporate paycheck. You get to keep that somewhat of stability. The con to me was that when I'm going in on this and I want to do my own thing, I truly want it to be my own. And the reality of a search fund is it's not your own. You are diluted, you have some equity, and definitely are incentivized by the business growing, but you don't own the majority for sure. I think you're a very minority equity stakeholder. So it just wasn't interesting to me. I can completely respect and understand why it is attractive to some other folks who maybe just want to bridge the gap before they dive fully into doing their own thing.
So when you were working at McMaster, was it
Yeah.
McMaster, McCarr? What was the role there?
My role was so it started out of college as a rotational program, and it's called the Management Development Rotational Program. They basically move you around to different roles where you get exposure to different areas of the business, and you also move your way up through that. So it's unique in that other rotational programs kind of define how long you're going to spend in each role. McMastercard does not. So in a given role, it just depends how quickly you can learn and add value to the role. Um, Before you're moved to the next one. So I had reached the point of being a senior manager at McMastercar. I likely would have stayed there for longer had it not been for my wife matching in fellowship and us having to move. But yeah, I look back fondly on that experience.
So what functional area, if I may ask, like operations, finance, marketing?
Yeah, all of them. So I started on the tech side at McMastercar. I moved to a design role. I then did a complete 180 and moved into the warehouse operation. So I was in the shipping department, then to sales, then to an area that I'd call digital and content strategy, and that was home for quite a bit. And then that's where I left from.
Okay, and
So
so I think that's important because you were there roughly 10 years or so,
yeah,
let's
nine
say?
nine years almost.
Yeah, and that's gonna play into your ability to secure financing. You are coming with a set of skills and experiences. Have you ever been a business owner before? Yes or no? For you, that answer was no, correct? This was your
That's
first opportunity. And we have other episodes that I think can dovetail nicely with this one. And one in particular I'll mention is my conversation with David Miller from Enterprise Bank. And it's really interesting, I think, for us as we talk about your process next, which is going to be the lead in here of securing financing. You were doing a search, and we'll talk about that too. But of course, in the back of your mind is, how the heck am I going to finance this, right? So let's talk about financing. When
yep.
you were approaching lenders, or you were considering options even before you found a target, what kind of pre work did you do?
Lori, I was so naive. So when I started my search, I was like I started Google searching basically businesses to buy, and then you got your classic biz buy sell and LoopNet. And then over time, as I learned how unreliable some of those leads were, I finally figured out that brokerages were the way to go. And so I didn't use a broker myself, but I looked at brokerage companies for the companies they were listing, kind of like you look for homes. Once I found businesses that I like, so Triform was one of the probably two businesses I was seriously considering. It then was like, okay, how the heck am I gonna pay for this. And obviously, I can't pay for I'll call it a multi-million dollar business right off the bat. I just don't have that cash. So luckily, the broker that the owners were using was helpful in connecting me with a couple banks. I also then started doing my own diligence and reached out to banks. So very quickly, I learned, and I love to negotiate. So I learned how to play the field a little bit, and that I would need to use an SBA loan. The rates were really high at the time. They're still high today, but they were even higher a year ago. And it was really about establishing a relationship with them, making sure they felt secure about not just me, but about the business. Luckily, those two things happened early on, and then it was all negotiation on the interest rates and down payment.
So I'm going to jump back into the point about connecting in with a broker. So in my
Yep.
experience as an M&A advisor broker, there's definitely a role that we play, and you've pointed out a really important one, which is if a business has been preparing and getting ready for a sale and they've engaged a broker, that makes the evaluation for the buyer a bit easier, right? Because that means they've been preparing and they've had professional help to help them prepare. Did you see that in how this played out?
100%, Lori. I think if I could do what's called an A/B test, and I could have gone at 2020 hindsight, and I were to say I had the broker I had versus not having a broker at all for the owners, I don't know that I'd be sitting here today because without a broker, because they do so much important work of pulling financials together, but also pulling kind of the soft statistics into an objective view. So I think, and you'll be able to comment more on this than even me, but the amount of legwork that likely takes is a ton. And I think the earlier owners can do it, the better. And I think you and I probably will share this, that it'd have been nicer even had the owners known this for 5 years and already started the planning.
Yeah, so let's give
But
some
yeah,
context. So, as you were looking at targets, did you hone in on manufacturing? Because Triform is a manufacturing
yep.
firm. Let's talk, about kind of your search criteria and what appealed to you for this particular target.
Yep. So I'll just take a quick step back. So McMaster-Carr is an industrial distribution company. So definitely in the industrial space, I became familiar with manufacturing just by lieu of working there. But McMaster-Carr's core business is distribution. So they're buying and selling. They're not making anything. So I was naturally looking for businesses in that space. I was looking in Pittsburgh and I was looking around New York. I didn't find any of those opportunities in Pittsburgh. And the ones that I did find around New York were just out of my price range. The second industry I looked at was manufacturing, and that's where I did have success in finding some interesting opportunities.
Yeah, so you kind of knew from a borrowing or lending standpoint what your threshold was ideally, and that's how you were sizing it, correct? If we kind of do the math in reverse, we look at maybe either a multiple of revenue at some level or a multiple of cash flow and EBITDA,
Yeah,
and is that how you were looking at it in
yeah,
kind
it's
of, let's call
basic.
it the lower middle market?
Yeah, definitely. It was EBITDA was the multiplier that I learned very quickly was the norm in the industry. And then it was, again, I was so naive starting this, but as soon as I understood the EBITDA multiple, I would then back into, okay, can I even put down the down payment for this? And then what would the monthly look like? And does the cash flow of the business support that monthly? So I was very heavy initially on the financial analysis, and I encourage everyone to be because that's really what you're up against when you have a loan, a monthly loan. But that's not to say all the other more subjective factors that we can discuss are important too.
Yeah. So when you met Triform, was it love at first sight?
It was not love at first sight, but there was definitely an initial connection with the two owners. I think one thing, like I said, I wanted an established business that had cash flow. So Triform definitely had that. The other thing I loved about talking about the owners from minute one was that they were immersed in the business. They knew the details, they knew the processes, and they had a really good handle on their customers. So um, customer first was essential to me. I really didn't want to buy a business that didn't already have that culture ingrained. And it's easy to say, hard to actually execute. And had felt like from day one, Bob and Jim are the two prior owners. They had that. So it wasn't love at first sight, but definitely a strong connection. It went really quickly. I met them over Zoom on a Wednesday, and I think I was in Pittsburgh on that Friday, meeting them in person. So um, clearly strong from both sides.
Okay. And then I'm guessing age-wise, they were maybe in their 60s.
They're in their 60s. Yep.
Okay.
One lower 60s, one higher 60s.
Any other family members in the company
Yeah.
at that
So,
time and
yeah,
now?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. So, one of the owners, Jim's kids, both worked at Triform, and I'll tell you, I actually looked at that as a red flag when I saw the initial sheet from the broker because I was like, why would the kids not want to buy the business? Like, is that a risk? And in talking with Jim and Bob both, they were just like, no, they just enjoy what they do. They enjoy the stability, and that's what they want to do. And I felt like, okay, that makes sense. But I would like to meet them. I would like to also make sure they're committed to staying here because they sound like kind of very valuable employees to them.
Yeah, and so this process is a bit of, dating and before you get married, and they were interviewing you too, right? Did you get the sense that they wanted to know, were you a cultural fit for the business?
100%. And I think that is influenced by the fact that Jim's kids were in the business. So that's something just for people to know who are interested in buying businesses. There are definitely different motivations. But yeah, I think for Jim, he was definitely focused on, is there going to be a cultural fit beyond just a business fit? So yeah, there was definitely some dating elements to it. We went to multiple dinners and lunches, and then finally I got to meet the kids.
Okay. And at the point of putting an offer together, who advised you? How did you do that? What were some of the terms? Did they come with a price and you had to negotiate what they were saying, or did you create a price range that they negotiated from?
I created the initial offer kind of by what research I had done already. And that was in the level of an IOI. So that's an indication of interest. That's the very first step. I submitted that with a number that I knew would be enticing to them to continue the conversation, but it wasn't official by any means. And then once I was kind of in that, I think it was probably five or so entities they were considering. That's when it got to get an LOI started. And at that point, I knew I was semi in the driver's seat. So I really started the negotiations with the broker and Jim and Bob kind of in tandem.
Let's talk about the transition aspects of the sellers and their intentions. At what point did that become part of the negotiations, and were there any sticky points?
It was clear from the beginning that they wanted out as quickly as possible, but they also didn't want to just be out from day one. So that was a good hybrid for me and a good starting point because I felt like if I had ever talked to an owner who wanted out from day one, it had been very concerning, especially with it being my first business. So both Jim and Bob were very comfortable with the idea that for the first year, they'd be staying on. And I really needed that. So that was written as part of the LOI, that was agreed upon by them. And largely that came true. Actually, it was less time than a year. I started feeling comfortable at month 6. So they could work from home or kind of live a more retired lifestyle earlier. But the way we structured it is that I would own a majority percentage of this company, not the 100. And that also incentivizes them to continue to be key stakeholders as different business transactions happen.
So, how did you evaluate the multiple of the business?
In terms of like EBITDA,
Yeah, and coming up with a number. So obviously there's an industry and there's revenue and there's EBITDA and
yep,
all the math. How did you come up
yep.
with what you felt was a fair offer?
I'm going to give AI a shout out here. ChatGPT was very, very new at the time, but I was using it quite a bit. I would say initially it was like, what do machine shops sell for generally of this revenue, like between 1 and 5 mil? What is the EBITDA multiple? I, of course, went in low initially. I went on the low side. And then, this is the advantage of having a broker because I think the broker, or I didn't have a broker, but the sellers had a broker. And for me, it was nice to hear what the feedback was. And I started to get the idea that if I got to X number, I was going to be in the driver's seat and going to win. So again, I mean, I take that with a grain of salt because I know he's trying to negotiate with me too. But it really stopped being about the multiplier and started becoming a number as we got to like, it was probably between me and someone else then.
Okay.
But for machine shops, just to be frank, in that range, it's about 4x EBITDA
Okay.
is what people land at. If it's a PE firm, which I was unfortunately competing against one, they'll go in higher. So my advantage here was that, again, Jim had his kids in the business. So selling to a PE firm and the risk of a PE firm coming in and just letting go of everyone is pretty high. So I know that, again, this is something to play at, but yeah, there was some
So
element of negotiation there.
let's talk about how the deal was financed. It was a couple different aspects. Can you share those?
Yeah, absolutely. So the deal was initially financed as an SBA loan with me owning the majority of the company. So 85 plus percent I own, and the rest Jim and Bob split amongst themselves. So they continue to be minority owners. And that's exactly what I wanted. It felt comfortable with them too. But the clause there is that for 2 years that holds. And then at the second year, so next August, they can mandate that I start to pay them monthly to get them out of the business. So that will be a seller financing note. Now, in between this, like between now and August, if I just feel so great about our financials, I could just buy them out right away. So there's a choice that I have to make whether I do that or wait till next August and then kind of pay them monthly.
Gotcha. The timeline we're talking about from when you started the search process to when you closed, how long was that timeline?
The search to close was about 8 months.
Okay.
From finding Triform to close was about 5 months. So there was 3 months of me going on BizBuySell and LoopNet and all those. Um, so yeah, I don't know how much you do this, Laurie, but maybe like if you help folks with the buy side, like does that sound does that sound more or less at the average, or is it
I think
generally?
it sounds fast.
It sounds fast.
I
Okay.
do think it sounds fast. You found the target, things got done fairly quickly. I think that sounds fast. Now, I would
Okay.
have said average is 6 to 12, so you're 5, that's why I'm saying it sounds slightly fast, but yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think that that sounds like a fairly smooth process too, which again, kudos for the sellers for getting organized, getting the resources they need, and packaging the business so that buyers like yourself could evaluate it. You know, a lot of times if we're not prepared, we're struggling to find the reports. We can't find, this or that operating agreement because it's, a piece of paper from 20 years ago. There's a lot of machinations and it's a mess. It's a total mess and it gets stressful. And then what happens? Well, then the process lingers and everybody gets frustrated and then it just sort of dies in the vine. And that's hard for everyone. It's hard for sellers, it's hard for buyers. So, yes, I
Agreed.
think one of the things you said earlier is really important. I want to underscore and come back to it, which is, yeah, we need to be preparing. We just need to be organized as we go through our business life. I'm thinking of you now because now you see this, right? And you bought the business. What are the things that you're thinking about? You're like, now I want to do it a little bit differently, right? You've come in, you went through a transition, right? So day one, you're now the owner. You're the majority owner. So let's switch gears and let's talk about this transition, right? So the deal's been done. You're in the seat. Congratulations. Day one. Oh my God, right? What did that feel like?
It was daunting. Walking in would be a good word. But because I had met Jim's kids are Katie and Jeremy, and I call them kids, but they're my age, so we all get along great. But because I had met them, I already had some comfort walking in that first day, meeting the rest of the team, and really making sure that everyone was going to stay was my biggest worry walking into day one, and then making sure that I had enough time to learn, but also evaluate the team and make sure that people were as dependable as Jim and Bob had described to me. Um, but things went very smoothly over the first couple of months. So it wasn't just day one; it was the first couple of months of nerves. Were always there driving in. I have a nice 1 hour commute to work every day, so I certainly felt the nerves. But yeah, they went smoothly. So
Yeah. And it's now 15 months. You've been there and you've been uh, carving your way. What has been some of the challenges? What are the top challenges that you're facing?
yeah, I'll split this answer up two ways. One, Katie and Jeremy will sometimes be like, "Do you have buyer's remorse on anything?" And one element is like I bought both the business and the physical in the real estate as well. Um, I wish I had done a better job looking into the building itself and just mandating that we look into like holes and cracks. And then I also wish I had looked into assets like our company truck. We actually had to get rid of that and buy a new one. So those are, that's a 50 and 20K expense used. So those are things that I missed during the diligence process that I would highly encourage people not to miss in the future. And I know I learned my lesson. The second element is the economy. So like I said, the first 2 months went very smoothly. I'd even say the first 4 months went smoothly. And then as soon as January came into play, it's always happens in an election year, but this was a little bit unique in that there started to be tariff announcements, and that just made the economy a little bit more uncertain. So we saw customer orders not fall off completely, but certainly go slower and be a little bit more methodical. That just meant less cash flow for us. So for the first half of this year, it was a struggle. We were really struggling to keep up with sales. I remember I was nervous at one point for payroll. Um, so that was a real challenge. And the way I combated that challenge was just by trying to hustle and find new customers. It is extremely hard to find new customers, but I'm glad I started earlier rather than later. I did not think that I'd have to look for new customers so quickly. So in my head, and again, naive, last August, I probably told myself for a year, I'm just going to learn about the business. And yes, I'll try to network and meet people in the community, but I'm not going to try to actively grow the business that much until I know enough. Um, that didn't go to plan at all because starting in January, I was out and about looking for new customers.
Hmm. Interesting. So if we go back to your first point, working capital, yes, it's
Yes.
usually a deal term, and working capital can get defined different ways, but most commonly, it's what current assets do we have in the business, what current liabilities do we have in the business, what helps us keep the lights on. This was an asset sale, correct?
This was a stock purchase.
Excuse
Stock.
me. That's right. That
Yep,
makes more
yep,
sense because you did 85%. Sorry.
yep,
Yes,
yep.
I should know better. Of course. All right. So this was a stock sale or entity sale, it's also known. And yeah, but working capital provisions were part of your stock purchase agreement, correct?
Yeah, and it was twofold. I had a working capital agreement with both the owners and a working capital with the bank. With the owners, that working capital really was cash. With the bank, it's basically a loan, part of the loan. So I've been very careful in if and how we've used the bank side of it. The working capital I got from the owners was just part of the deal, and that was cash from day one.
Right. And so the bank gets basically access to accounts receivables and things like that should there be issues on repayment for the loan, correct?
Yeah, and actually, I don't mind sharing this. So the bank I used was Live Oak Bank. They have a very defined process where every quarter, I owe them an income statement, I owe them a balance sheet, and just like it can be a few bullets, but just a report on how I feel the business is going. And I remember the July one for Q2 was bleak because I was like, if this keeps up, this is not going to go very well. So, luckily, I think with new customers and just maybe the economy gaining more confidence in the last quarter, I've started to feel a little better, but it's definitely a struggle.
Yeah. No, and it's good that it's actually really good and smart for the bank to be asking you for those financial statements. Imagine if they didn't and you
100%.
were headed into kind of choppy waters, that would be very tricky. Nobody likes surprises. Um, the other thing that you commented on was the capital expenditures. You have a machine shop, so you have a lot of machines. And I got a tour from you, which was awesome. And so I am visualizing as I was saying these words here. There's a lot of machines, a lot meaning maybe 20 or so, if I'm
Yeah, 15
counting
probably.
counting
15.
about right.
Well, actually, you're counting some of the older ones. Yeah, 20.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we're talking CNC machines, like these are heavy duty machining of metal, right?
Yep,
And we're not making like small dainty pieces of plastic. It's heavy
yep.
stuff. And so that's part of it is, what equipment do we have? What equipment are we going to need? What are the vehicles that we have? What capital expenditures might come in the future? So you're looking at headcount for people and growth, and then you're looking for your equipment. I think that's an excellent message for folks as they're doing their diligence to just be mindful of those hidden costs that you might not be thinking about. Repairs on the building, again, great point. The other point that you brought up was about the growth. And you were initially going to wait, but you couldn't, and so that ended up being proactive and a good thing. I want to talk about some of the growth initiatives besides or getting new customers. Have you hit a wall anywhere about in the company of, hey, we've got this new business and now we got to bring these new customers on board? Any smoothing out of that process?
Definitely. There was a point where I went to a trade show in Chicago in May, and we had so many leads. So it was an awesome trade show, but we almost had too many leads, and I was completely bogged down. I should say we were completely bogged down with the number of quote requests we had for parts and projects. That generally we get quotes back within a day or two, and we were at the point where we were like weeks behind even reviewing a quote. So we did get bogged down. At the same time, I think our good communication to customers and just telling them that, "Hey, we're really busy, but we haven't forgotten about you," it did it was okay, and it got smoothed out, and then as we got into July and August, we were all caught up, and we were able to be on pace. But yeah, there was a point, and I'm mindful of this because we're going to another trade show here in a few weeks, of how to make sure we're prepared for a potential of just an influx of work from new leads and making sure we keep them. Because yeah, regardless of whether or not we had a bad first half of the year, I was always interested in growing the business. So now that we're at that point, it's like, how do we make sure that we can support that potential growth, not just allow for a bunch of leads to come in and then not act on it?
Yeah. So let's say you're 2+ years into this whole process. You've got some wisdom, you've got some battle scars. You're certainly at the front end of your journey here, so you're nowhere near done with the process. Nonetheless, I know you're a thoughtful guy. As you look at everything, what advice would you give yourself at the outset when you were first starting?
I think the advice is find it all comes down to how much capital you have to an extent here because but really find reliable places to look for businesses, whether that's people or whether that's the brokerage companies themselves. So I was lucky. I went through Calder Capital, so shout out to them. But Calder Capital was the one who listed Triform, and they were fantastic. I know of other brokerages where I was looking at businesses and they were very slow. So, find good brokerage companies, or if you're going to hire a broker yourself, do your diligence. Like Lori, from our conversations, I would love to work with you in the future because you're detailed and responsive. I think that wasn't the case with all brokers that I interacted with. So that'd be one. Number two, I was so focused on the financials, and I encouraged that. I said that earlier, but I did lose sight of some of the smaller things on the income on the balance sheet, like a company truck, which is it's only showing up as 20,000 in a multi-million dollar business. You're not going to go crazy, but then I don't know, what was it, week 6, I get told like this truck is old and it needs to go. I'm like, oh shoot, like what did I do? Why wouldn't I look at that? And that sounds so basic to look at, but you just don't think of some of the smaller things, but they aren't small. So that would be something else. Financing, definitely negotiate with banks. Don't let one bank just tell you this is the way it is and this is the rate, and you're not going to find any better. You will find better. And then, yeah, I think Laura, you said it best, but like date well. Like date well during that time you have pre LOI and even post LOI and diligence, because that's really your only shot before you own the business to ask all the questions you have, to meet all the people you need to meet. Um, I can't think of anything else, but yeah, like if I ever had a red flag about like Katie and Jeremy, the two kids of Jim's, that would have been like a potential deal breaker. And I just had such a good feel from meeting them. And I think they would say the same. I hope they would say the same about me. So yeah, I think those are the 4 or 5 points I'd encourage.
I hear it so consistently: fit first, financial second. Because
Yeah,
like you said, if you didn't click with those two individuals who the owner said is important for them to stay in the business, that's what they wanted. There's no deal. It doesn't
there's
matter
no
what the
deal.
financials are, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. For
Yes.
me, it was,
Yeah.
it was just financials from what can I afford? But after that, yeah, you're right. It's completely about fit.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing that. You think you have other acquisition deals in you?
I hope so. I hope as Triform grows that we're able to either acquire complementary businesses so that we're able to kind of be a one-stop shop, or do some vertical integration. But I hope so. First priority though is making sure we take care of our current customers and we grow our customer base. But I hope I'm talking to you here in a year or so, and we're looking at other businesses.
Yeah, I know you're really growth minded and it's so exciting. And I think you and I met right when you had done the deal. I think it was really early,
Yeah,
and
probably
it's just
2
so
months in or
exciting.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was so exciting to see how you're taking the business to the next level. We have covered a lot of ground here, and I want to offer you this opportunity to be reflective for the benefit of other acquisition entrepreneurs. What are the top three things that you think an acquisition entrepreneur should consider if they're going to enter into a search process?
Number 1, take the approach of being a learner from day 1. So, always ask questions, always do more research than you think you have to, and be humble throughout the process. Don't ever develop an ego. Number 2, leverage resources as much as you can. So whether that be the bank, whether that be brokers like yourself, Lori, or whether that be the team you have and the team that you're going to have, make sure you're asking them all the questions. Make sure you're really leveraging them. And then number 3, I would say be transparent with your team as you're coming in. I think I look back and we've kept everyone at the company since buying the business, which I think, okay, that's something I pat myself on the shoulder about. But really, I think the way it was is just being transparent from day one that yes, I'm coming in here as the new owner. We aren't going to change anything for the foreseeable future, but absolutely, you should know my goal is to grow the business, and I think they know that. They knew that from the get go, and now when I bring them complex work, I see sometimes nerves, but I see a lot of excitement too because we are getting new customers, and that is exciting for anyone at a company.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. Ashay, is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think is relevant for our audience today?
No, I think that covers it.
We covered
Pretty much covered
everything.
the life.
We
We
covered
covered
a
the
lot
life.
of ground.
We cover the life cycle. So yeah, if I missed anything, that's more on me.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I was thinking about is you're in the chair. Is it a lonely place?
It can be certainly, especially when things were tough at the end of Q1 and into Q2. You don't really wanna share all the details of how much you're struggling with your employees, so that's maybe where transparency is. You have to be discretionary with how much you share. So, that was definitely challenging. Luckily, I live with my parents during the week, so they're an awesome support system for me. My wife, like I said, we held hands and jumped in this together. But also just talking to other business owners is something I also should have encouraged. Maybe if I were to give a number 4, talk to other people, because very quickly I found that it wasn't just me going through the struggle of the economic uncertainty, it was everyone. So that helps to at least make you feel like you're not alone and there's others, and then you can talk to others about it. So
Yeah.
certainly lonely, but just try to find ways to combat that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, this has been so amazing and insightful. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I'm sure there are people who want to reach out to you. As you said, to talk with other acquisition entrepreneurs is really valuable. If people want to connect with you, what's a good way to do that?
I think easiest way is LinkedIn. I try to be active. I should be more active. Follow our Triform page, please. I'm trying to be more active about posting there, and then just email or feel free to give me a call.
Awesome. Awesome. Ashay, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really enjoyed our time together.
I did too. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll see you soon.
I'll see you soon. And big thanks again to Aashay for joining me on today's show and sharing his journey from corporate life to small business ownership. If you want to follow along, again, check out Aashay's profile on LinkedIn, reach out to him and follow Triform on LinkedIn. We'll put those links in the show notes. And thanks again for following Succession Stories. Be sure to follow the show so you get all the episodes and also find us on YouTube. And this is Succession Stories, where we help business owners learn, grow, and let go. We'll see you next time.